are living these parallel lives. And you begin to see how this is all about Michael trying to evade, his father's legacy, but being every time I think I'm out, they keep pulling me back in. That's the story of the Godfather. So who is the Old Testament centered around? Well, if all you have is the Hebrew Bible, it's centered around Torah. The prophets, the priests, and the kings, they're all about Torah. The kings obey Torah, and they're vindicated, they're blessed. They depart from Torah, they fall into idolatry, and they're destroyed. Israel falls into idolatry, they abandon Torah, they get carted off into Babylon. When they come back from Babylon, they say, we're never going to depart from Torah again. It's all Torah, the prophets, forever saying, look to Torah, look to Torah. It's all about Torah.
Probably saying it right now.
Yeah.
In Israel.
Yeah, totally. But you pop the New Testament, all of a sudden, not just the New Testament, but the Old Testament has been about Jesus, Messiah, all along. He is the embodiment of Torah. He's the faithful Torah-observant Israelite. He is the faithful Israel all along. And so you recenter the story, the center of the canon. So you got to have the Septuagint, or else you really don't begin to understand why to make that connection. And it's one of the things that Protestant partisans on this point just drive me nuts, because I want to say, look, you're reading the Bible that in a way that was innovated in the 16th century. Christians have been reading the Bible with the Apocrypha as a necessary ingredient all along. And now you guys show up in your wise guy 16th century posture and say, we can do without that. But you don't even do without it. You live on the fumes of a legacy that you've rejected. So anyway, enough with my let's see. I'm going to get you here. Let's move a little faster. Both Christians and Jews closed their canons at roughly the same time, but the criterion was clearer among the Jews, who were interested to distinguish themselves from rapidly growing Christian sects. The Berenius list, dated to the late 1st, early 2nd century, contains 27 books. All those: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, Joshua, Ruth, all those. Notice that Esdras is there. That's Ezra and Nehemiah as the Septuagint, and Nehemiah as in the Vulgate. There you go. So that's the canon of the Hebrew Bible without the Apocrypha. In his 39th festal level, 367, Athanasius of Alexandria, blessed St. Athanasius that helped to give us the Trinity, recognizes 22 books of the Old Testament, omitted the disputed Esther, and combining Jeremiah, Lamentations, and Baruch. So you got the apocryphal books inherent there. Eusebius describes Melito of Sardis' list in 170, following the order of the Septuagint without Esther, or 6 of the apocryphal deuterocanonical books. This reflects a clear Jewish influence. So you see the status of the Apocrypha is kind of blowing back and forth a little bit here. Eusebius also, Origins of Alexandria's 22-book canon, appears in 254. The greatest debate over the Old Testament canon in early Christianity was occasioned by Marcion. Okay, Marcion's a guy you got to know because he is the benefactor of the heresy known as Marcionism. Marcionism he came to Rome in 140, proclaiming that Christianity was based on an absolute division of matter and spirit. This is Gnosticism, in one of its forms. Basically, it's a bastardization of Plato's philosophy. Everything's either matter or spirit, but matter is evil and bad. Anything that is of the spirit is good. And so basically he comes up with this idea that the creator of the heavens and the earth, Yahweh, is an evil demigod, not the true God. And that the God of Jesus Christ is the true God. Therefore, we should get rid of the Old Testament. Get rid of it in its entirety, soup to nuts, and just hang on to the New Testament, and preferably the Paul books most of all. For Marcion, only an edited version of Paul's Gospel, the Gospel of Luke, portrays Jesus truly. Marcion founded a number of churches, and they were remarkably successful for a time. They were the, what's the big giant Baptist church out?
Bellevue.
Yeah, Bellevue. Baptist of the day.
Six Flags Over Jesus.
Yeah, there you go. Especially in the East, his communities were strongly ascetical in their behavior, so they behaved themselves. They were really nice. Virginity and fasting were essential to the freedom of the spirit. They didn't get involved in all of that sex stuff. And the reason why is because it's all about gooey stuff and bodily fluids and, stuff that we're trying to get away from, the flesh. He was condemned by Justin Martyr and Tertullian for these crimes. The New Testament hints at an emerging canon consciousness in various places. The big two are 2 Peter chapter 3. He's writing to this congregation, and he says, "So our brother Paul wrote to you according to the wisdom given to him, speaking as he does in all his letters." This partially answers your question. Why did they hang on to these letters? Well, he's got all these letters, and he wrote to you according to the wisdom given to him by God. There are some things in them that are awfully hard to understand, and all the preachers said amen, which the ignorant and unstable twist to their own destruction as they do the other scriptures. And that's the important part of the phrase to keep in mind. Paul wrote to you in his letters, ignorant and unlearned people twist them as they do all the other scriptures, which seems to indicate a kind of equation going on here, an emerging canon consciousness.
Wait, is that an actual Bible book?
Yeah, that's 2 Peter. That's the New Testament.
Oh, all right.
Revelation also is an early witness to this. This is 90 thereabouts AD. I warn everyone who hears the words of this prophecy, this book, if anyone adds to them, God will add to that person the plagues described in his book. If anyone takes away from that words of the book of prophecy, God will take away that person's share in the tree of life and in the holy city, which are described in this book. These are the last verses of the New Testament. And it's always, a good ordination move when you're being examined. Why do you think that the canon is the canon? You say, there's a reason why Revelation's put at the end of the Bible. Not just because it describes the events of the last days and the hope of the resurrection and all of that stuff. But this little passage is interesting because it's not only at the end of Revelation, it's also at the very end of the whole Bible, which gives you some sense that it's applicable to both. Don't add any more stuff to this. It's closed. It's a deposit of revelation. Well, the New Testament Gospels preserve the extant traditions of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And somebody's calling me for some reason. It's my wife. The epistles and the other writings are occasional, serving the needs of the local communities. Basically, you've got an emerging kind of canon of writings that's being passed around as I've described to you. Justin Martyr in the mid-2nd century mentions the Memoirs of the Apostles being read on the day called the Sunday. So think about that. You sort of say, what did the Mass look like in the earliest days of the church? Well, it looked an awful lot like somebody, as part of what they did, getting up and reading from the Memoirs of the Apostles. Future deacon, one day, right? This is what I do on every Sunday, man. I love doing that, man. You go to the altar, process out into the congregation with the book, read the gospel. I'd love doing that. And it says I'm doing something that they've been doing for 2,000 years, man. That's awesome. Well, the four canon tetramorph was directly mentioned by Irenaeus of Lyon in the 2nd century. So you notice the dates. You're moving out from the apostles, and the further you get out, the canon is starting to kind of pull together. Not only, the Old Testament canon is pulling together in the reflection of both Christians and Jews independently of one another. And the New Testament canon is starting to kind of congeal and firm up too. By the early 200s, Origen may have been using the same 27 books that we use, though there were still disputes over Hebrews, James, 2 Peter, John, Jude, and Revelation. The one really important witness is the Muratorian fragment. It suggests that there existed a set of Christian writings somewhat similar to the 27-book New Testament canon, 4 Gospels and arguments against objections to them. The Latin Codex is from the 7th or 8th century, but contains features suggesting it is a translation from a Greek original that was written sometime between 170 and 300 CE. Again, Athanasius, in addition to the Muratorian fragment, the other massively important list is the Festal Letter of St. Athanasius that gives us the 27 books of the New Testament that we have. Okay? The picture that I want you to have is that this irreducible canonical diversity, both in Judaism and in Christianity, as you move from first to second to third century, it begins to consolidate and firm up. All these communities are isolated from one another, but the isolation is not absolute. And because the isolation is not absolute, people are copying from one another like you would pass notes to a friend that didn't make it to class. And as time moves on, everybody's starting to kind of arrive at a more or less stable list. And of course, by the time you get to Athanasius, it's almost absolutely stable. And that happens in the 4th century. And that's the important thing. All right. So now let's launch into our comic book heresy heroes. I'll try and move the other two sections. This section is a little bit longer, but the last two are pretty short. So, but it's basically the same story. What are Trinitarian building blocks? And I said that you've got hints and evidences here and there in the Old Testament, but you really begin to see the evidence of reflection in the New Testament. This is the most critical one of all. It's in a very early witness of the historical Jesus, but it does a lot of the heavy lifting for us. In Exodus 3, this is the famous Moses at the burning bush. And you know the story. Moses is there at the burning bush. He sees the bushes in the Negev burst into flames randomly because it's dry and hot. But this one's unique because it's not being consumed. It's staying green. And the voice from the bush says, Moses, Moses, go deliver my people. And Moses does what any sensible guy would do in that kind of situation. He asks for some identification. I would want 3 forms of identification and a note from his mother. Who should I say will send me? Because I'm taking my life in my hand if I go and appear before Pharaoh. And this is a very pregnant question to ask, because in the ancient Near East, if you got the name of a god, you had some magical power. Ancient Near Eastern religion